idea, concept. And I think that sometimes, in many spiritual traditions, we just try to conceptualize. If we just know enough, if we have enough knowledge, then we have truth. But that's not what truth is. Truth is an experience that we have in our union with God. The other example that I gave is from one of my favorite poems, not in this book. This is just one stanza, but it really shows how things like poetry and symbolic language can really communicate something in a pretty profound way. So this is from Cast All Your Votes for Dancing by Rumi. Somebody already read it. Learn to recognize the counterfeit coins that may buy you just a moment of pleasure, but then drag you for days like a broken man behind a farting camel.
Nice mental picture.
It is a nice, but really conveys a message there. It really, says something. And so that's why I like poetry, because it has a way of helping us understand humanity and our experiences of life.
So, James, what's a counterfeit coin?
Well, I mean, one counterfeit coin could be drugs or alcohol, or trying to satiate our presence with social media, television, movies, gambling. It could be many different things. So, there's a lot of different, a counterfeit coin is going to be different based off of who is experiencing having the experience. So yeah, and learning to recognize them. And the whole poem is about dancing, and it's about how this is, joy is really the point of life. It's not about trying to find the right external thing to satiate an internal feeling of lack. Could be another human being. Okay, and so we're going to talk about the mystics. And yeah, did you want to say something? You have a microphone in front of you.
I just was going to say that what you said called to mind, like I remember when I was in high school, and I was a hippie, so I didn't really go to many dances, but if I went to any, I wasn't really enjoying the girl's presence, her company while I was dancing with her, because I wanted to look around to see who all was there that was looking at me. Just.
Does anybody else have an example of counterfeit coins too? I think we all have had the experience with counterfeit coins. So approval of others is a big one, I think. Okay, so we're going to talk about. Oh, did you have one?
As I get deeper into metaphysics, which I consider mysticism,
Right.
what I'm finding is that the need to get rid of the counterfeit coins. In other words, where I need to not watch television in order to become a mystic person. Why would I think that there's a physical thing that has the power to take me away from my centered self?
Mm-hmm.
And so I become more and more aware that I don't have to be afraid of the physical world. I don't have to guard myself from the physical world. I embrace myself and enjoy the physical world.
Yeah, and I totally agree. In my own personal experience too, it's like, it's not about just trying to abstain from certain behavior. I do know that in the mystics of the past, they certainly had a lot of regulations and rules, and I don't know that that's really the right way of identifying the counterfeit coin. The counterfeit coin is really, does this expand my capacity to experience love and joy and peace in life? And there are, like a television show that I've been watching recently. It brings me a lot of joy, and if it stopped bringing me joy, I would turn it off. So it's not about trying to, say that, oh, this one thing is bad, because it may be right for a certain individual and not right for us. And so I think that that's really, the counterfeit coin. That's why the symbolic language is important, because my counterfeit coin isn't going to be the same as everybody else's.
And it could change, because what could be your counterfeit coin at one time may not be at another.
Yeah.
Change.
Yeah, absolutely. So the mystics were just people who, throughout history, have been highlighted as individuals that talked about an experience with God. And so the first one that I want to talk about, and we're really going to focus more on the poems than we are on the individuals. So if you want a biography of Meister Eckhart, especially, there is an excellent book called A Mystic Warrior of Our Times. And oh my goodness, I can't remember I thought I was going to for sure remember the author's name of this. Anyway, it'll come to me and I'll tell you later. But anyway, Meister Eckhart. So Meister Eckhart was born in Haarlem, Germany, was a Dominican monk and scholar, was known for his gift for public speaking and writing, was never like a classical poet. He was more of just an author, and he wrote a lot of his works in Latin, and was accused of heresy at the end of his life, which seems to be a common trend with mystics, as they're oftentimes accused of heresy. And so what I so what I wanted to do is I wanted to have somebody read like one of the poems, and then we can discuss it. Did you want to read the first one? Okay. It's a really good one, yeah. Does anybody have any comments on that one? Something stand out? Your purpose is to be. Yeah, I agree with that. Meister Eckhart was a natural mystic, so nature had a lot to do with how he derived information about God. And the one thing that for me, the one thing that this poem represents is a return to nature, but not always. I think that sometimes people are like, well, a return to nature is when I go camping. But the truth is that this is nature. The natural realm is all around us. Sometimes nature includes computers and microphones and interpersonal connections with others. And I really think a lot of what Meister Eckhart is saying, because he says that he asked all things to marry him. And to me, like what Matt was saying, this is about being, because a lot of our attention is focused on becoming. It's focused on the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. Whereas Meister Eckart's like, but I want to marry the moment. I want to marry, this reality. And you were going to say something?
Well, I was just going to say it seems to me that people like John Muir or even Henry David Thoreau, I think would have to have been heavily influenced by this person's perspective. And from this poem, I mean, it basically encapsulates their whole philosophy.
Yeah, it's interesting with Meister Eckhart. His work was repressed or it was suppressed by the Catholic Church up until the 1970s. And it wasn't until the 1970s that the Carmelite Order started reprinting his work and getting it out there. It wasn't even available. Yeah, isn't it interesting how when people have mystical experience and they write about mystical experience, how it can, it just parallels. It's kind of like with the Fillmore's work. I don't know that the Fillmores would have ever had access to a lot of this body of work. However, it's very clear that a lot of the same narrative is repeated. Does anybody else have anything to say?
Yeah, I was just going to comment that, the Catholic Library, if they just released this in the 70s, how many things are still there that have not even come. I mean, wasn't it just recently, a few years ago, that they finally admitted that Galileo was right?
Right.
That goes back to the 1400s.
I think it's sort of generally true that no matter when you look at a church, and whatever church, they're the last ones to become mystic.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's interesting. So I was introduced to the mystics when I was pretty young, when I was still in the evangelical church, and I was having mystical experiences because I'm gay, and I was trying to change my sexuality. So I spent hours a day in meditation and prayer attempting to change that aspect about myself. And what ended up happening was I started having experiences very similar to what the mystics wrote about. And my teacher at the time said, I think you'd really like these old Catholic guys and gals that, and so that's how I even got introduced to the mystics originally.
I was just going back to the nature, is when I hear those poems on nature and everything, it's not speaking to me to go back to nature, like the animals and the land, as much as it's speaking to me that I need to go back to my true nature, and that my true nature is going to be instinctual. My true nature is going to come from this place that's not ego-based. So like, for instance, in giving, if you're in giving, you're just as happy to give as you are to receive. You love to be in the flow. That's our true nature. And that whole process, you let go of all the crap that goes with it, and you just love being in the flow.
Yeah.
That's our true nature.
Yeah. And that is nature. It's what's happening.
So, I guess it's my understanding from God.
Oh,
is
that's the name of the book, Love Poems
Right,
from God.
okay.
Yeah.
This is a poem from God. Till it left that thought of being everything and all one, that the agony and the questions came up. So I think that's an important aspect of we are all one, and and we are God.
Right, yeah.
I think your connection with the mystical, even though somebody didn't have maybe access to this particular teaching, it's universal oneness, and it doesn't matter what language, what tradition you come from. When it boils down to, you're learning the infinite, the finite, the infinite, and so the transition between finite and infinite is what the mystic is doing, and so it's all gonna look the same and point to the same experience,
Right.
no matter what country or nationality you're coming from.
Or even as individuals, I think we experience God differently. One time, Matt and I were out in the woods. We were on a trail, and we both left the trail at the same time. And there were tons of trees, but we both didn't say anything to each other. We walked up to the same tree, and we both reached out and put our hand on, without talking about it. It wasn't planned. We put our hand on the tree. I was following my feelings because my instincts, my intuitive nature is inside, it's sort of a feeling. But for him, he's claircognizant, so he experiences actual words. And he looked at me and he said, the tree said it wanted to be touched. And we both, it was quite a ways off the path. It wasn't like we both just reached out and touched a tree. We walked off at the same direction without saying a word. And to me, that just shows that we each... It's okay. Okay, so we each are headed toward the same outcome, but we each experience the path there differently, is my perspective on that. That story has always been a good analogy for me. Okay, so the next one. Who wants to read the next one?
I can do it. Well, go ahead.
Do I need to
Yeah.
find?
Absolutely.
Everything. Everything I see, hear, touch, feel, taste, speak, think, imagine. It's completing a perfect circle God has drawn.
Does anybody have comments on that?
For me, this poem brings to mind, I work in the field of mental health, and there's a coping mechanism, I can't remember, it has to do with mindfulness, but you focus on things you hear. That something like, for example, 4 things you hear, 3 things you can smell, 2 things that you can touch, and it actually literally calms you. No one knows why somebody came up with that, but it's extremely effective, and that's what this poem comes to mind and brings to mind for me.
Anybody else?
Certainly stops you from thinking that
Right.
and puts you into feel. Yeah.
It brings you back to right now, which is the only moment that's real. I mean, this is it. This is all we have forever. And that's what eternity is just now, forever. We can go on to the next one. Is anybody, any volunteers? It's a lie.
That's as close as I can get.
Okay. It's a lie. Any talk of God that does not comfort you.
This one for me brings to mind the guy down on the square on the soapbox.
Oh, yeah, the evangelist.
Because there's a perfect example. That's some talk of God that doesn't comfort people.
Right, yeah, the evangelist, or you're going to hell, or, yeah.
Westboro.
Yeah.
Did you have something to say? Okay.
I mean, I know for me, this is where I started deconstructing my own personal beliefs when it came to religion. Because I observed that, well, first of all, there's that verse in the Bible that says the fruit of the Spirit are love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. And I was like, well, where is it? Jesus said, I'll know them by their fruit. Good trees don't produce bad fruit. Bad trees don't produce good fruit. Well, I'm not experiencing it in this particular environment. And for some people, it worked really well, but for me, it was not working. And I think that for me, that's where I realized, I don't really, the fire and brimstone, we focused a lot on end times eschatology stuff. It just didn't fit with my ever-growing understanding of God. So it was, for me, it was a lie. I mean, it's very true for a lot of people, but it brings me no comfort at all. And that's one of the names that Isaiah and then Jesus gave to the Holy Spirit.
Serious sound issues, I'm sorry. Need a sound technician.
Again, as I study more of metaphysics, the way I see it, what I really understand is that my world out here mirrors what I am inside. So I cannot look at this world out here and find anybody who's telling a lie without becoming part of the lie. I am perpetuating that lie by that. And so when I think of that, my work is to stop saying that person's doing it wrong and who's doing it right and how can I do the right. My work is to say nobody is doing it wrong. I accept everybody. I love everybody as they are. And the thing is it's not about tolerating people, but it's about becoming the world you want to see that is not filled with lies, because there's no lie in you. There's no untruth in you, and then your world can't have it. I don't know if that.
Well, I think what's important is for me, is to recognize that just because something is true for somebody else doesn't mean that it's true for me. Like, overcoming the fear and limitation that I experienced in my parents' religion, or even my parents' fears and limitations, or even my own fears and limitations, that I can say, that may be true for them, and it is their truth, and they may even find peace from it. But if it's not expanding my own capacity to experience love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, and all that list, then it's not really true for me, even if it's true for another person. So that's kind of the conclusion that I made. So let's talk about St. Catherine of Siena. She was born in 1347 in Fontebrata of Siena. She was born in Siena, Italy. I don't know, some community, and I don't know how to say it. So she, at a very, very young age, she was 6 years old, and she was walking by a monastery, and she had a vision of Jesus and a few other spiritual guides. It says 4 years old, but I'm almost positive she was 6 years old. So she experienced supernatural love, is what she described. And from that, she extended that love outward to everyone that she met. And people that wrote about her wrote about how, when they were in her presence, she was always focused on whoever was in front of her, and that she only ever exuded understanding and love. Right. And she was mostly known for her kindness and compassion towards others. She became a Dominican nun in her 20s, which I found interesting because a lot of the mystics came from the Dominican tradition. It's very fascinating to me. She was the author of a book called The Dialogue, and she died very young. She was only 33 when she died, which, according to the mythology surrounding Jesus, that's the same age he was when he died too. So who wants to read the next poem?
I'll go ahead and do it.
Okay.
Vulnerable. Vulnerable we are, like an infant. We need each other's care, or we will suffer.
Any thoughts?
Absolutely. We are vulnerable, and in many respects, how many times do you feel like an infant, where, I go, oh my gosh, I think I was thinking that or feeling that because of what happened when I was a child.
Mm-hmm.
So we can constantly go back there, and we do need each other, absolutely.
Abraham says it, that without other people, we couldn't be here. We couldn't exist, because other people are the very context in which we live.
Mm-hmm.
The main request of Jesus left to us from the New Testament is to love one another and care for each other, which is reflected beautifully in this poem.
Mm-hmm.
And his statement seems to indicate this is your work, to love one another and care for each other. And that is implying that we're all like infants. We need care,
Mm-hmm.
and we're to care for each other. That's where the care is to come from.
Yeah.
From us.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
What if that caring for another causes the other to be less than?
So, give me an example.
Codependence.
Well, I don't know that codependent is very loving toward the self anyway. Right. Well, Catherine of Siena came from a very specific place of this experience of love that went inward first. and then was expressed outward. So I don't know. I mean, it would be interesting to know if she had codependent relationships. I mean, she impacted so. I mean, there's so many different stories about her impacting so many huge communities that it's kind of unlikely, because usually if a person is codependent, they hyper focus on another individual. They hyper focus on what A Course in Miracles calls the special relationship. The relationship where I get all of my needs met, which there's no such relationship. You know, that's what this poem's all about, is that we are the fulfillment. I mean, we find fulfillment when we engage with, you know, the whole. Without that, we do suffer.
This was the whole teaching of the book, Daring Greatly. Is daring to be vulnerable, to expose who you are, because so many times you have drawn by vibration people that have the same issues you have, but they're afraid to speak up and say so. And so often when you hear what other people are going through, it frees you to accept it, and when you can accept something, it releases it.
So I carry these cards a lot of time, not always, but a lot of time around with me. But at one point I had a real issue with agoraphobia, where I didn't even leave the house for months. And I did a lot of meditation and prayer. I was doing a lot of healing work. And something in me said, go pick up those cards and take them with you. And so I did. I told my husband, I said, I'm going to the grocery store. And he looked at me and he said, you are safe in the universe and all of life loves and supports you. And I'm like, okay. Because he knew what I was going through at the time. He knew how difficult just going to the grocery store was. I don't have that issue now. But I grabbed the cards and I started picking them up. Or I started carrying them with me. And anytime I would feel anxious, I would spread out the cards and I would just ask a person, whoever was closest to me, would you like a card? And I had them read them to me. And then in that way, I just believed every person was my teacher. But what I found out was people would pull the exact card that they needed. And the first woman, I remember the first time I did this, and the first woman started crying, and she said, how did you know? How did this happen? I don't even remember what card she pulled. And I just remember saying, your soul knew which card to pick, and I showed her, they're all different. And it spoke so directly to her situation. And it just made me realize you could walk up to just about anybody in the grocery store, put your hand on their shoulder and say, I'm so sorry. And they will probably respond with, who told you?
You know, think of vulnerable, you can think of vulnerable as needing something outside of yourself, that vulnerability is that. But I guess when I look at this, I look at it, and when it says like an infant, vulnerable like an infant isn't questioning. It's not saying, do I deserve this? Do I deserve to be loved? Do I deserve to be anything? It's just open. That's the vulnerableness, is being just so open and trusting of life that we can see that the nature of who we are amidst this world of other beings is wanting to interact with other beings. And that's the kind of vulnerable. And it's when we close ourselves off to things, that's the suffering. Not because we're needy, but because the nature of it is to love and to interact.
Well, infants are pretty honest too. I mean, if an infant is happy, if a baby's happy, my teacher used to say this all the time, if a baby's happy, it can light up the whole room. And if a baby is angry, the whole neighborhood knows it. And we were all that honest at one point in time. We were all little babies like that. What happened? And I think that that's one of the things that this touches on too, is that vulnerability of just being honest, like, I need this right now. And you know, babies know how to process things. They know, little children know how to process their emotions. In fact, it's a somatic thing for them. They don't just get mad. They get mad. And they move their bodies around, and they process it through their bodies. And if you just let them be, I used to work in early childhood development. If you just let them be for a few minutes, and you make sure that they're not hurting somebody else, you make sure they're not hurting themselves, and you just let them be, they'll get over it real quick, and they'll just move right on to their life and start enjoying life again, because they know how to work it out. And and we've all been kind of trained how not to work it out, or, how we're supposed to behave in an environment. And I think that vulnerability has to do with that too, recognizing what our physical bodies need when we're dealing with something. I know some of my healing, I had somatic experiences where I was physically shaking during the experience because I was releasing certain things from my body that were traumatic. So, does anybody want to read the next one? Do we really only have 5 minutes left?
No,
oh my.
We go to 10:15.
Okay, good.
I can do it again if no one else is volunteering. Did you?
I'll read it, yeah. This place of abundance, we know nothing until we know everything. I have no object to defend, for all is of equal value to me. I cannot lose anything in this place of abundance I found. If something my heart cherishes is taken away, I just say, Lord, what happened? And 100 more appear.
Does anybody have a thought on that?
The same thing as I don't know whether you want to call it a theory, whatever, behind tithing is what you give away comes back to you, pressed down, shaken together, running over, and oozing out. And so it's you can't lose anything. What you give away does come back, and it comes back by the hundreds. You look at any plant and the seeds that they produce. You look at insects and the eggs that they lay. There is so much abundance, and it just comes back.
Yeah. I planted 1 cucumber seed. I mean, I planted more, but I only let 1 plant go. And I'll tell you, you get a lot more seeds from that 1 plant. I have more cucumbers I'm pickling that I'm eating cucumber sandwiches every day. Because that's how a seed works. Whatever we put out comes back to us multiplied. And if we think about like the law of attraction, and what does that mean with the law of attraction? One thing that Catherine of Siena was known for was how compassionate and loving she was towards everyone that she met. But one of her messages was, how do I serve? And I mean, she experienced an abundance that, I mean, how many of us can say that? I just say, Lord, what happened? And 100 more appear. Anytime we lose, I mean, I think it's because with that law of attraction, when we say, how may I serve? It's like the universe looks back at us and say, okay, how may I serve? And that's infinite. I mean, that means we are in the flow of infinite abundance. And I really think that's what she's getting at here.
So, James, I got to ask you, where did you get these pictures? Because Meister Eckhart looked very odd, maybe even grumpy, and she looks like she's smirking.
Yeah, okay. This is definitely a modern art piece of Catherine of Siena. And then Meister Eckhart, I found like 1 picture of him, and that was it. That was all I could find. And he looked real grumpy, didn't he? And weird. Yeah. It's so funny because 90% of the stuff that you read about him was about joy, and he just looks so stoic and grumpy. Anything else? We can go to the next one. Who wants to read the next one?
All has been consecrated. The creatures of the field know this. The earth does. The seas do. The clouds know, as does the heart full of love. Strange, a priest would rob us of this knowledge and then empower himself with the ability to make holy what already was. Wow, you know what? This calls to mind to me is within the Catholic Church, the indulgences. I mean, he's obviously, wow, talk about somebody ahead of his time. He was slamming them for what he was experiencing,
Yeah.
and rightfully so.
Well, and she was a Carmelite nun, so yeah. No, it's all right. Yeah, she was a Carmelite nun, so she was definitely, and I mean, I think that, you know, too, we're going to do a movie tonight about the evangelical church. Well, it's not just about the evangelical church. It's about conversion therapy, where religious institutions try to convert people, homosexuals or transgendered, or into, yeah, it's Pray Away is the movie that we're going to watch. And it's interesting because it's like the religious leadership almost tries to tell you what is worthy and what is not worthy. And I find it so interesting, even the name that they use for, they call it conversion therapy. And it really tells a lot, because their whole goal is to convert you into their side. And it's like, and it's another thing that's always fascinated me about the LGBT community is I was a part of the evangelical tradition. They talk a lot about how the LGBT community is trying to convert people, but the only people I can see that's trying to convert anyone is these religious institutions. So.
I'm just going to speak to the nature of all this. The way that I understand is that if a lot of us have lost the understanding of who we are, of these powerful creators, of these beings that have the power for health and have the power for abundance and have the power of love, we're as much a part of everything, and it's hard for me now to really come down on different religious beliefs or religious places, because in that sense of disconnection, many of us are doing things to find our connection. And one of the things that happens is through our power of focus, we create what we need. But if I go and I say, this piece of material is the magic material, and it will heal you, and I'm saying that to a world that's not being healed, am I not doing something better than sitting saying, there's nothing there for us, there's no healing? So if someone finds something that they want to share with others that is going to heal them, and I think that's what starts religions, is I think the religion says, I have found something that's made a difference in my life. It's given me something. I want to give it to you, but I believe in this piece of cloth instead of the principle behind it. Mm-hmm. And there are many, many people that are believing in a piece of cloth as a religion or whatever they want to, because they haven't found the power beneath it. That doesn't mean those of us who are beginning to find the power beneath it should be going, how stupid are they and how bad are they for still believing in a piece of cloth?
Right.
It's just going, isn't it wonderful that step was there, and this is another step.
I just wanted to.
When that brings about mental health and trauma. And that's
Oh, right. That's why I speak out against conversion therapy, because that does a lot of damage.
We got to remember too, that, you know, in religion, how many people have lost their lives because they didn't believe in the only religion there was at the time.
Right. Well, even in the list of mystics, I mean, these were people who were heretics. Mm-hmm. You know, they were happy heretics. You know, like some of the people on the list were imprisoned and beaten and for what they believed. Mm-hmm. One of the things, and a lot of times I really appreciate being able to go back and saying, okay, so who are these people? What happened? Because I personally believe that the whole of what we are experiencing is the evolution of consciousness. And I realize that not everyone is going to wake up in this lifetime, and that's fine. That's where they're at. And that's okay, right? I mean, that's why I walk around, you know, I have a lot of religious family, and I tell you that one of the mantras that I use in my mind, I don't say it to them directly, but in my mind, a lot of times when I'm interacting with them is, that may be true for you, but it's not true for me. Mm-hmm. D.
Oh, sorry, D.
I spent many years as an Episcopalian, and I have nothing against it because it served
Right.
for those many years until it no longer served me. And
Right.
I had to search for something else.
I've read the Bible completely through at least 12 times, and I studied Greek and Hebrew, and I appreciate that. Now, at this point in my life, I kind of see the Bible, I mean, I see that there's value in the Bible, but I also personally see it more as like historical fan fiction than actual, you know, like all of these things literally happened. I don't see that it's wrong that anybody takes a literalist view. I just personally don't. But yeah, I mean, I value studying those things. I value studying the mystics and the saints and studying theology and all that stuff. And I've taken, you know, I think that's how the evolution of consciousness works. Because there's a lot of things that a lot of these mystics say that I'm like, oh, that's baloney. But that's because that's where consciousness was at that point. And there's things that we can gain from them. But then there's also things that we move beyond. Any healthy spiritual movement will continually move beyond the limitations of the past. Right.
I've had this experience occasionally in writing, that I would feel that I was inspired, if you like, to write about a certain subject, but it was so intimidating for me, so overwhelming and daunting, and I would sit with it for several hours. And then I would look and see, and I said, where did this stuff come from? It wasn't, I didn't have those thoughts before to put into this. I didn't know where it was coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And yet there it was on the page. It's a wonderful experience, but it is experiential. It's not knowledgeable. It's not intellectual at all.
Right, and it's kind of like what Meister Eckhart was talking about. It's like we fly from cage to cage, and we just appreciate the opportunities when our wings can spread out. Right.
Well, first, I want to thank Paul and give him the Phil Donahue Mic Handling Award.
Thank you, Clay. I'll accept it.
But what came to mind whenever, especially just the poem and what Wendy said, was I couldn't help but think about Oral Roberts and those little prayer pillows, where it still galls me to know that he was basically kind of, in my mind, extorting money out of little old ladies that couldn't even pay their utility bills when they were sending him money to buy this little prayer pillow that was going to be the answer to all their prayers. That's a modern day indulgence,
Mm-hmm.
and I just feel so sad when I see the accoutrements of religion being manipulated to another's gain, basically.
Yeah. I can relate to that.
I think this is the perfect time to turn the page and go to the next poem.
All right, let's do
Because
it.
the next poem is all about this.
Yeah. So it's Saint Francis is the next guy we're going to talk about. And actually, I was introduced to Saint Francis like when I was very young too. There was a movie in the 70s called Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon, and I would like to get a hold of that and have a movie night here because it's such a phenomenal movie about Saint Francis of Assisi. Oh, you have it? Well, there we go. So he was born in 1182 in Assisi, central Italy. Have you noticed that a lot of these people were born around, like, near the same place? Isn't that interesting? Went to war when he was very young, and he was captured and injured, and from that he had a spiritual experience. When he came back, he vowed not to participate in violence anymore, which at the time was during the Crusades, so that was a big deal for him to say, no, I'm not going to do that. He did travel to the Middle East, and it is said that he met Shams, who is the teacher of Rumi, and that's where a lot of his mystical understanding came from. Francis heard a voice that told him to build my house, and so he followed that voice, and he started worked with the Pope to start the Franciscan order. Although the leadership of the Catholic Church at the time did not really, they were not huge fans of his, but because he had such a following, they sort of let him start that order. He dedicated the rest of his life to serving others. He was even known to hug and kiss people who were lepers. I mean, and there's a lot of stories where he did that. So let's go on to, who wants to read the next one? All right, because he gave birth. So precious is a person's faith in God, so precious. Never should we harm that, because he gave birth to all religions.
Well, you don't hear that in too many religious circles, do you?
Right? I mean, and he was a Catholic, so.
I'm surprised they didn't burn him at the stake.
Yeah, the one interesting thing there was some oppression going on with St. Francis, but because so many people met him and fell in love with him as a person, that there wasn't a lot that the Catholic Church could do.
My favorite church in Israel was a Franciscan monastery in Emmaus. As you tour Israel, all of the churches have frescoes and gaudy artwork and everything, and this was like this bare chapel that had the most amazing acoustics. And the guy I was with was a musicianary, and so he sang songs to us while we were there. And he specifically took his tour group there. It wasn't on the tour, but he took us there, and their gardens and their grounds, and just the feel was so amazing. It was just an amazing experience to go to that monastery.
James, can I just want to interject here. We try and wrap up all of our announcements and prayer in the last 5 minutes. So if we can, I tell you what, you have enough material here.
I know, and I think I'm here in
exactly.
2 weeks, so.
Oh, okay, good.
So save the handout?
Yeah.
If you're planning on being here, I think it's 2 weeks. I'd have to look at the calendar, but if you want to save the handout, that would be great, and then we can just pick up where we left off.
This is pithy stuff.
Okay, James will be talking again September 5th. So we could either collect the handouts and hand them back out to you again, or you could yeah, I think it would be too. You can take it. I'm just. I'm not collecting. I mean, I can collect them, but I'm just. Okay. Okay. And take foot out of mouth.
Do we have announcements?
Yes, let's go ahead and do that. And then, first of all, I just want to say thank you, James. Please give him a big round of applause for phenomenal talk. And I so look forward to seeing James again. Next week, we do have Amy, and I don't have her topic handy. I didn't ask her ahead of time, and I should have. It's in the announcements? Okay. Amy. Yeah. Amy Burnett.
The spiral of faith.
The spiral? Spiral of faith. Great. Thank you very much. And, of course, at 11 o'clock, we do have our service, and there was someone we could have asked who that subject was. How may I serve you? Thank you very much, Kat. Okay, as always, we do want to thank you so much for contributing to the church. And, oh, boy, it's so nice to have the people that are here and those online. Thank you so much for participating. Tom has a basket in the back. Feel free to donate your tithe to Tom or put it in the basket. You can get on Tithely if you'd like to. We do encourage that, as well as PayPal. You can always mail a check to 2214 East Seminole Street in Springfield, Missouri, Unity of Springfield. Again, we thank you so much for tuning in and for being here, and God bless. We're going to get together in a circle, and that's it for today. See you next Sunday.